Sausage.
All right. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. It's time for the Amish Inquisition yet again, episode 301 on Sunday, the 22nd of October, 2023. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
I'm Matt.
The dwarf, the cripple, and the
mother of mindfulness.
That'll be me.
Yeah, that's one way to describe you.
We're very happy to be joined tonight by Paul Stobbs. How are you doing, Paul? Can you hear us? Are you reading us?
Loud and clear.
At least the sound doesn't have far to travel through the internet tonight, does it?
No, as we discovered, no, not at all. Not at all.
We could have done this in person if we'd have known how closely related geographically we are.
Well, maybe next time.
Yes, maybe next time. Yeah. I'm looking forward to this. I was saying before I heard you on Mark's podcast, my family thinks I'm crazy. We should say thanks to Mark for helping matchmakers tonight.
Absolutely.
And have you just recorded a second one with him as well?
I have. I think he put it straight behind a paywall from what I saw. So I have yet to hear it again, but I did have a talk with him about a month ago. Yeah, I think it's his patrons only right now, but I think eventually he does release them. But he just keeps like a huge backlog of interviews just to release as time goes on. So.
Yeah, I think it's an early access
shtick,
isn't it? If you sign up for Patreon, you get some bonus content before everyone else. There's a lot of podcasts doing that, aren't there?
Mm.
I mean, you're starting a new podcast, right, Paul? Can you hear us?
Sorry, it glitched out for a second there, but I'm back.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, aren't you starting a new podcast with the missus?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Me and my wife have started something a little bit more low-key than the kind of stuff I talk about on my channel. A bit more light-hearted, a bit more grounded, shall we say? Yeah, because the stuff I talk about is pretty damn out there. You know, it's up in the sky type of stuff. But we talk about news articles, me and my wife, some of the craziest stuff going on the ground level. I think we're trying to keep it relatively British as well. Something from the audiences at home. And it's called Tales Under the Big Top, and we just go through crazy news articles and try and stick to a theme each episode. It's a new endeavour, and it's a bit of fun.
It's a good title.
Yeah.
I like that one.
You kind of mixed in your sort of clown hypothesis in there as well.
a little bit. The recent episode is called the Clown episode. I got to talk about them a little bit. So
what was that, 4 hours, 5 hours on the clowns?
Oh, I kept it under an hour. An hour. It was literally just me sharing with my wife some of the craziest articles about clown killers and things like that I've uncovered. Just going because it's Halloween, let's make it a spooky episode about scary clowns, and that's all I'm allowed to talk about for the next year, I think, until the next scary season.
I was kind of umming and ahhing really what to talk to you about tonight, because you've been on some of the big shows in the US talking about your Nephilim clown hypothesis, and it is interesting. I mean, it struck me because what do we say? There's nothing new under the sun. And when you hear sort of a fresh idea, fresh hypothesis in the conspiracy related realm, that's automatically interesting. So I didn't know, so I kind of want to talk about it, but I'm also...
Can we touch upon it a little bit? Because, Paul, I'm the kind of guy who watches the one show, so I'm not really down with the... was it Napoleon clown theory? Nephilim clowns.
Yes.
Can you just give us a little run through?
even if we don't talk about it for the whole.
Sure.
The whole show.
So, in a nutshell, if I can do this in a quick manner,
Challenge.
It comes from a contrarian Christian perspective. First of all, it's a theory based in the idea that fallen angels mated with human women in the Bible, talked about in Genesis 6, where it says the sons of God came down and mated with the daughters of men and created giants. A lot of people in mainstream church, kind of the realm, go by the Sethite view, whereas basically the sons of God were referring to just really righteous humans on Seth's side, and they sinned and then had sex with the bad people on Cain's side, the children of Cain, and somehow that produced giants. Well, I don't believe that. A lot of people in the conspiracy world do not believe that at all. They think that's a very naive way of viewing things, as we understand it, and as history outside of the biblical perspective explains it. Things came down from the sky and mixed themselves with humans, basically. But you don't have to go off the biblical story. That's pretty much the story all over the earth, for most historical accounts. And they created demigods, giants, monsters, basically. And my theory posits, basically, that through the mixing of the seraphim angels, which were the Watcher class angels that did this, they were serpent-like in nature. So they had wide viper-like jaw features, sharp features. They were described as flying fiery serpents. That's what the word seraph means, which is where you get the word seraphim from to describe these angels. Thinking of, for example, Quetzalcoatl in the Americas was a feathered serpent's god, or think of the dragons of China, which are these fiery, long, serpentine, monstrous-looking things. Dragons are everywhere in historical context, and they were the gods at one point, and these were the seraphim from a biblical perspective. So take that, first of all, some kind of crazy-looking, fiery, feathered-looking serpent creature, man thing, mixing itself with a human. You get a hybrid creature which looks incredibly psychedelic in colour. So my theory, based on that understanding and many other things, basically posits this idea that what we call a clown today in the Western world is a symbol which has been purposefully created by secret societies to represent the offspring we call the Nephilim from these serpentine flying creatures. And that's it summarised extremely quickly. Quickly. Okay. And there's a history that it goes really far. Even just the invention of the modern clown is a trip in its own right. But historically speaking, what I do in my work on my channel is it's more of an anthropological study of folk traditions around the world. Because there's this thing that most cultures, the oldest cultures and the traditions, do on every continent. It's called ancestor worship. And what they tend to do is dress like their ancestors in order to be possessed by them. They dress like the thing to attract the thing, the spirits. Now, these ancestors don't mean grandma and granddad, like we would refer to an ancestor as. They mean the builders of their civilization and their culture, the Nephilim of the ancient past. So they dress like the Nephilim, basically, to channel them. Shamans specifically sometimes are the only ones who are allowed to do this in certain tribes. In other tribes, everyone's allowed to do it. It's fair game. You just have to dress like them to be that way. And what I've found is a repeat pattern through all these cultures around the earth that show clownish-like features. White skin, red makeup lips, polka dots as well. Some kind of headdress with fiery red feathers or red reeds in some way. There's rock art depicting these ancestor creatures, let's say in Australia, the Wangina are a prime example, which lets you have a huge red afro, pale white skin, polka dot patterned clothing with a neck ruffle, just like we would describe a clown here in the West. And if you basically cherry pick a lot of these features from all of these different cultures, you can mash it all together and create a symbol, like a stereotypical caricature, and you would get what we call a clown in the West. And then you find that through secret societies, include, let's say, something like the Shriners, for example. They have their own clown sects within each secret society. I think that's a clever way of basically being able to venerate their gods, the demons they work with, the Nephilim, openly in the public without anyone actually realizing that that's what they're doing when they dress that way. It's a hidden, occulted symbol, which now I've kind of brought it to the light through my work. It's kind of, people are kind of clocking onto it now, and they're realizing it's kind of been everywhere for an extremely long time. But again, I guess that's as much as I can kind of clarify in a very quick 5 to 10 minute stint there. But there's hours and years of research that went into this. And
Well, like, how many hours of this stuff have you put on YouTube?
I've got 41 episodes in a series called The Nephilim Look Like Clowns, which was started in 2016. Also, if you include all the extra stuff I've done, the podcast included, we're talking up to like 200 hours worth of content, just exploring this idea. And I'm writing the book on it currently as well.
Oh yeah, we should talk about that, because you've got a GoFundMe going now, haven't you, for the book?
Yeah, it's a pre-order system. £100 or more will get you a free signed copy of the book once it's published. Just something to help me fund basically copyright costs, editing costs, things like that, publishing costs in the future. It's all kind of just sat there waiting to be used for that, and obviously to pay for the delivery costs as well when the book is published. So that's all that's for. But yeah, it's the support's been overwhelming actually. People are really excited for the book, and I'm halfway through it. So I'm 15 chapters into a planned 30 chapters. Hopefully it should be dusted and ready to be published by the end of next year. That's the goal.
I noticed you recently had Gary Wayne on your show, which is, well, I read the Genesis 6 conspiracy probably 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't know there was a follow-up book out. Is that recent?
It's coming out in October, he tells me.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's about to come out. It's, his first book, you read it, it's like 800 pages. It's this huge, thick wedge, which you can use as a doorstop, basically, of just biblical history. And a lot of my work actually is based off of a lot of what he's discussed about where the Nephilim come from. I agree with his thesis, basically. I think he's got it down, and his contrarian view of biblical history is one I ascribe to as well. There's minor differences, I suppose. I theorize about things I don't think he's mentioned, and vice versa. So I got him on to have a talk. I talked with him in 2017. So it's been about, 7 years since I last had a chat with the guy. But we just picked off where we left off and had a deep dive into all sorts of concepts to do with the Nephilim. It was good fun. Yeah, I enjoyed talking with him.
Cool. I imagine people listening, one stumbling block will be the historicity, if you like, of Nephilim.
Yeah.
How, some people will say, oh, it's a mistranslation, it's this or that. Remember when we had, years ago, we had Ken Army on? And he was mainly talking about Nephilim and giants, that sort of, the confusion that was there. So that's one, I think that's the first stumbling block for a lot of people to sort of accept your theory is, how do we know the Nephilim were actually real? And secondly, my thought is, does it even matter? If the people who we're talking about believe it's real, does it even matter whether they existed or not?
Well, I would posit that they do exist, and the evidence is there in history. There's plenty of rock artwork depicting giants walking among men in every civilization. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty much undeniable. If you want to go into more recent discoveries, the best we can do now, unfortunately, is look at all the newspaper clippings from the 1800s where they were just digging up these giant bones left, right, and centre all over the place and talking about it in every single news article and newspaper as you could imagine. These things were insane to look at, and they drummed up a lot of interest. And every single one of them was basically snatched up by the local authority and disappeared.
Ended up in the Smithsonian, didn't they? Pretty
much, yeah. And I do a short paragraph on that in my book, actually. Well, I say a section, a good few pages, just summarising that history. And there was a lot of dodgy stuff going on. There was a lot of people taking over the Smithsonian during that time period who had certain agendas to push certain ideological belief systems about evolution and things like that. And giants didn't really fit into it, so it kind of, the timing of it all and the takeover of the institutions by these characters who were renowned for being staunch evolutionary theorists, it kind of all plays into that. But as far as I'm concerned, historically speaking, every mythology talks about giants, and there's plenty of remnant artwork, culturally speaking, that talks about monsters, hybrid creatures, and giants. So that's all I would say on that.
Yeah. Do you follow, because I remember when I was reading Gary's book, would you class him as a biblical literalist? So like the text of the Old Testament, he believes every word is literally true?
Yes and no. I think he's a realist as well. I think he knows what to take as allegory and what to take as literalism. But he doesn't believe the Bible lied at any point. So there's a kind of a difference in that respect. And he doesn't try and change the interpretation of the Bible to fit his theory. Do you get what I mean? So if what he's thinking doesn't match up with what he can prove in the Bible, then he would tend to leave it to the side, But he does obviously explore extra biblical texts, pseudepigraphical texts, texts which wouldn't be considered biblical canon, but were books of the same time period as well. He does try to create a holistic picture, and just like I try to do as well. So a lot of people would just say it's blasphemy even to consider looking at the Book of Enoch, for example. But
I was just going to mention that.
But you can't leave the Book of Enoch out of this if you want to talk about the giants and where they actually came from, biblically speaking. And Enoch is referenced in the Bible itself by the people who are quoting Enoch directly. So I think it should have been canon. Personally, I think there's a bit of a conspiracy to keep it out as well. I would say, and so would he. Hence why it's called the Genesis 6 conspiracy.
I've had the Book of Enoch on my bookshelf for about 6 years, maybe, and I just don't have the balls to pick it up yet. It's one of those things where I don't feel like I am ready for it. Like I've not done enough preparatory reading. Do you ever get like that with certain texts? You think? Do you ever find them intimidating in that way?
Sometimes. I mean, I'm in a position because I'm writing a book that I have to read all these texts now. I can't just take people's word for it because I have to reference them myself, and show where I've got the information I'm talking about from directly. So I've been reading all these extra biblical texts, and there's a lot to be said for First Enoch and then Second Enoch and Third Enoch. A lot of people argue that Second and Third Enoch are more corrupted later versions of the text, where Gnosticism kind of got its grips into the ideology, and First Enoch, and reading them, I would say that stands as true. First Enoch, to me, doesn't seem to have contradicted anything in the Bible. And what it reveals is just... Because this is the thing about Genesis. It's a very quick summary of pre-flood history. It's extremely quick. There's a lot of detail that is not there in the canonical Bible of Genesis. It just basically says, God created the heaven and earth, then he created man, and it's kind of quickly summarizing very quickly what he did. It's like, okay, so he created a man, but what was mankind doing for that long period of time before? It doesn't go into that detail. And then it very quickly says, then he created Adam and Eve in a garden, and then they were kicked out of the garden, and then Cain killed Abel, and it just it's jumping very quickly. It's not talking about how they were raised, for example, or what the world was like when they were in this time period. There's no details. It's just quickly summarizing to get to the point where we can start talking about God's chosen people in Abraham. It's kind of trying to get there very quickly, And I think it was written in a way that assumes that people have already read the other books that explain all of this. It's kind of, you should know, it's basic knowledge by now what our history is. We all know where we come from. We don't need to go into the details. The details are in Enoch. In Enoch, basically, that's where you'll find out what happened. That's it. It's all there, And it seems like it was basically standard reading of the time. Everybody had known about that history. It was already well documented. Right. Everyone knew about the Watchers. Everyone knew about the corruption of man and the flesh that involved. Everyone knew about the fall of Satan and all these type of things, and Lucifer. It was all kind of explained already, And it was kind of course, we all know about this because we're living it. We see it with our own eyes. It's kind of, it goes without saying in many ways, because the early, the Old Testament is basically a book of genealogies. It's a book that tracks the lineage all the way from Seth through to Jesus Christ. That's what it's trying to explain. It was an uncorrupted, pure bloodline that you can follow all the way back to Adam. That was the point of it. So all these extra books that you see around the outside fill in a lot of these missing details, which are stumbling blocks for a lot of people. If you don't know, for example, that mankind was contending with bloodthirsty giants, the flood can seem like quite a cruel decision to make by God, until you understand that actually, thank God he did that. Because we were almost wiped out. Mankind was almost corrupted fully and gone, and that was the last chance to save his creation, us, in a sense, But if you just see it from the perspective of the the Sethite view, which is the popular church view, that they were just really bad people who just did bad things, then it just seems like God was a bit petty and unforgiving, you know. But when you understand, no, these were monstrous beasts that were tearing mankind apart and utterly destroying the creation from head to toe and just annihilating the lands and the peoples and everything within it, mixing mankind with animals and doing all sorts of hybridized weird stuff, you can understand why, you know, God would basically hit the reset button before it was too late.
A great reset.
In a way, yeah. And this is the thing, I think it definitely changes your perspective on these events, which people do often equate to God being a cruel dictator. It gives you that perspective as to what was really going on, basically, and you can be a bit more forgiving, I suppose, for those decisions. It certainly helped me gain some perspective when I started actually looking into it, but most people just never will. You know, it's one of those.
Speaking of the flood, have you ever, are you interested in sort of pinning down geologically sort of where it was when it happened kind of thing? Are you interested in that sort of end of the last ice age, or various different contenders are posited for a possible, you know, people trying to link the biblical flood to geology? Or do you not care?
I've heard many things over the years about trying to pinpoint what it was like when it was, the damage it caused. I heard one person theorize that, for example, the Grand Canyon, which is this huge tear out of the ground, which was said was made over millions of years of water erosion, was actually created in like a day, very quickly, from the immense torrents of water flooding through that area, you know. I did a chapter on the flood in my book, and it went on for a lot longer than I actually anticipated, like 18 pages long, because I went through all the flood myths I could find all around the earth, and they're everywhere. There wasn't a part of the earth that wasn't touched by this. You know, it wasn't a one specific geographical location. It seems like some places suffered more than others, but everybody felt this global flood event. It was, and it's kind of still in the collective memory of humanity even to this day. The issue for me, which I find a lot of people don't like talking about in my group, because obviously within the Christian circles, is I argue that it seems like Noah wasn't the only survivor and his family, and people don't like hearing that because they say, well, that contradicts the Bible in a way, and I found ways that actually it doesn't technically. And we were told in the Bible everything on the dry land was destroyed, not things in the ocean, for example, or on top of the ocean, or within the lands, underground, or in the air, you know.
Wow.
It just says everything that was on the land was destroyed, basically. And if you understand in terms of just before the flood, it's described in the book of Jasher that mankind was mixing themselves with animals and creating hybrid creatures. And this is referenced in Genesis, where it says all flesh was corrupted. This is kind of what he was hinting at in Jasher, that man took it upon themselves with the help of fallen angels who were still knocking about by that point, to change their DNA to hybridize themselves. So if you get a fish person, a mermaid, let's say, they can probably survive a flood quite easily, you know, and this is where you get the corruption finding its way into the next after the flood. Because we do know giants were there after the flood, because most of the early stories of God's people retaking the Holy Lands, the lands of Canaan, are full of giants. So they got there somehow, you know, and there's many theories as to how that happened. I can't settle the answer on that, because this is a debate that's been happening for as long as I've been alive, and then some, you know, this goes way back. But there's many ideas. People say the angels came back and did it again, mated with women again. I posit this idea that the Nephilim likely did survive because of the hybridization of the humans. The corruption of the DNA made its way through that. And one prime example of this I have is that there's a story of the Canary peoples in South America, and they have their own flood myth. And it describes two young brothers surviving the flood by climbing to an extremely high mountain. Somehow they survived long enough for the waters to come back down. Now, if all flesh was corrupted, as the Bible says, then these two brothers were not human. They must have been some kind of hybridized something or other that gave them some kind of hardiness, giving them the capability to survive the flood in some way. So they weren't human, and they got high enough to the peak where they could live without food for a long period of time. Maybe they had the ability to hibernate like a bear or something and not have to eat for the whole winter. You know, maybe they had some ability they'd adapted from another creature to just wait it out long enough not to die, basically. But then this interesting story of these Canary peoples is that once the water recedes, these two brothers come down and they're met by two bird women. So sirens, we would call these. And the brothers raped these women and repopulated the entire area with these two women, these two bird hybrid women. And that's just one isolated story, very far removed from the Middle East. You know, and they had nothing to do with the God's chosen people talked about in the Bible. You know, they were a different culture, living a different life with a different thing going on, and they still have this story of a huge flood, and then the Nephilim hybrid creatures mating afterwards to repopulate the area. And the Canary people to this day still believe they are the descendants of these hybrid people. You know, that's how they would call themselves. So there you go. There's many ways they could have survived after the flood, but one thing I've undeniably seen for myself and written about is that a flood did happen. I couldn't pinpoint the timing exactly. There's a lot of arguments today in the conspiracy culture that our timeline is completely messed up, and we've been lied to historically about where we're even in it, where we are in the timeline. We have no idea, you know. But the evidence, I think, is there, at least through the oral traditions, that we were rocked by a huge flood. And there were other survivors other than Noah. One major example of a survival story, which is not Noah, is in the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have Utnapishtim, which was a documented king of the Larsa civilization in the Middle East. He was the 10th documented king of Larsa, the last king, in fact, before everything was decimated and destroyed by the flood. Utnapishtim survives the flood by being told by Enki to make a boat. You know, a lot like Noah was told by God to make a boat, but Enki is a fallen angel and God is God. But you know, these angels were privy to what was coming. They weren't stupid, and they told their offspring, their children, like the kings of the time were Nephilim creatures, they were giants. They went to their own children and said, you better prepare, a flood's coming. So there's a lot of stories all over the earth, not just the Gilgamesh story, which shows you know, this person called Zuizudra or Utnapishtim surviving on a boat, a lot like Noah. Not the same story, not the same person, different background, different history, different post-flood story. Utnapishtim was given immortality. Noah died after 300 years. You know, it's not the same person. They're talking about two separate people. But then a lot of people would argue, I hear this quite a lot, well, they have a flood story, Noah's just a copy of it. Because they're older.
Yes,
and it's kind of like, no, that's not what was going on. These are just different stories of different people, you know. And
it's a question of perspective, isn't it? A lot of the naysayers, they see these similar stories and say they're derivative. They're a monomyth that derived from a single source. But what you were saying is, no, these are separate stories happening in different locations around the same time, presumably. And they're separate.
Yeah, and
derivative.
And the names can often change, and because you find a lot of these stories scattered all over the earth are similar to Noah's story. And if you go off the Tower of Babel incident, not long after the flood, the peoples all got together into one place and they all spoke one language. So they very likely all in that civilization and culture shared a lot of stories about their own survival, you know, and they all heard about Noah, for example, and what's your story, you know, how did you survive type of thing. And then the languages were confused and they were sent out. So it's very likely a lot of people are telling the same stories with different languages. So they have different interpretations, for example, and stylistic choices of describing it. So you do get a lot of that going on. A lot of the myths I listen to are either a copy of the Noah story, a survival of a weird-like human who can do supernatural things, somehow surviving the flood in a very lucky way, stories of human-like creatures climbing to very high places, and some of them somehow changed their physiology and managed to shrink to go inside a pot or something like that. There's some very odd stories, you know, but some of them are retelling the Noah story. Some of them are telling stories of other giants who survived in other means, like hollowing out a tree trunk, for example, is a very common one. And not building a boat necessarily, but making a very quick makeshift craft very quickly with whatever they could find. That's a very common one. Or climbing to a very high place. They're the main survival stories. And I tend to believe they're all pretty much true and telling the same story. Because biblical history explains that there were giants in the earth before and after. And
Yeah.
that's how it was there, you know. So when people argue with me saying Noah can't have been the only one to survive, it's kind of, well, the Bible does tell you they were there before and after, so I don't know, you tell me. You know, I tend not to think there's a contradiction simply because it does say what was on the land was destroyed, and boats aren't on land; they always stay above the water. Even when the water's rising, they stay on top of the water. You know, it's kind of like a legalist argument, I suppose, technically speaking. You know, but these things count. These things matter when we know that they were certainly there after the flood. So we have to find the answer for that and square it with biblical theology at the same time. So,
What happened to them now? Where are they now? What happened to them after that?
right. Well, the Nephilim, when they die, because they aren't technically supposed to exist, their spirit, or nefesh as it's described, stays on the earth, and it's described that they become wandering spirits. They're kind of still here, basically, and this is what we call demons today, and it's what many cultures and folk traditions call ancestor spirits. So that's where they are. Physically speaking, most of them were pretty much wiped out. The story of Israel wiping out the people of the lands of Canaan is a story of wiping out the remnants of the Nephilim after the flood. Most of the pre-flood Nephilim were wiped out. It's described in Enoch that as a punishment for the angels who did this, who made these monsters, they had to watch their beloved ones, so the giants they created, kill each other. So the OG giants, the first ones, the huge ones, the ones the size of mountains, you know, they were wiped out. They killed each other. They basically, they weren't very smart from what we gather, and they basically thought, I want to be the only one in control, so they started fighting each other for power, basically. And then they turned on...
human.
Yeah, and then they turned on their own parents, the angels, because they wanted to be the only gods on earth. They thought they could beat their own creators. And this is where you get myths like the Clash of the Titans, which is the story of the gods of Mount Olympus fighting the giant titans of the earth. You know, it's the same story that you see in Enoch, just stylized throughout different cultures all around the earth. So a lot of them were wiped out in the initial culling as a punishment. Then the angels who created them were bound in chains. Some rebellious angels who didn't have sex with women were still knocking about. So there was a period of time after that where that's where the corruption was going on with humans. They started mixing DNA together. It's kind of a new way of doing it without having to have sex with people. We'll just make the people corrupt themselves. Do you get what I mean? And this is where all the centaurs, the mermaids, the sirens, these hybrid creatures started to appear around that time. And then there was a flood. So most of them, these corrupted vessels, these Nephilim creatures, were wiped out in battles and then the flood. And then there was a remnant that barely made it through to the other side and started to repopulate, centralized into a location in the Middle East we call Canaan. That seems to be where they all converged in some way. And then there was a decree to wipe them all out, and that's pretty much what happened, but they didn't get them all. They failed to get them all in the end. And Israel...
We're talking about Joshua here.
Yes.
Right.
And Israel was punished accordingly because of that. They basically lost the foothold of that land as a result. They didn't fulfill the covenant, basically, in that respect. But it's said today that the bloodlines of these secret societies and those who control the world believe they are the descendants of these Nephilim creatures. So in terms of a physical presence on the earth, you do have humans who do legitimately believe they have the divine right to rule over mankind by nature of being part divine, because they think they are the descendants of the Nephilim. And this is why we have secret societies. This is why we have these kingships and ancient bloodlines, these serpent bloodlines, they would describe themselves. And Gary Wayne goes into a lot more detail than I can, but yeah, it's trippy. It's trippy. So
you're gonna name some names, Paul.
I mean, most
joking,
most European bloodlines in most of Europe, basically, I would say the kingships there were pretty much descendants of the Nephilim, is what they believe. That's why they believe they have it, But you'll find
is this related to blue blood?
Yes, that's the idea. That's the concept.
Right.
It's people say, well, it's my God-given right to rule, but what they mean when they say gods is they have angel blood in them. That's basically what they're trying to say, that they have the dragon's blood, the serpent blood. And you'll find even in England, you know, in London, dragons are everywhere. They're on everything. It's like, and there's a reason for that. You know, they're trying to hint at something, and it's as the occult works. No, we're not supposed to know that. We're not supposed to interpret those symbols for what they actually mean. It's kind of been hidden from us for a long time, but they're kind of telling you what they believe all the time, as long as you just do a bit of research into the occult and the symbolism behind it. But yeah, that's this is the only way I can describe where the Nephilim are in a physical sense. There may be some. To be honest, I think we're all kind of corrupted a little bit now. Maybe I'm not sure. Maybe not. You know, or maybe not all of us. But I think there may be a contingent of humanity that's so watered down and diluted that you wouldn't even be able to tell if you met one. We all look kind of human now. It's, you know, we're not giants, you know, with psychedelic reptile features. I don't think that really exists. And like I said, a lot of these people who claim, you know, that person over there is one of them, you know, you look at them and you think, well, they look very human, you know, so what are we going off exactly? And I think...
I wonder if this is what 23andMe are doing on the sly. They're collecting everyone's DNA so they can cross-reference for Nephilim blood.
I've heard that theory before, you know, and I get...
Oh, God, nothing new under the sun.
No, I don't know. I am suspect of these DNA things. Like, why do you want our DNA so much? You know, someone's making a record somewhere, aren't they? But I don't know. I don't know. It's fun to speculate. What I do know about the spiritual sense is that we do have this demonic phenomena, this problem of not only people channeling demons in these folk traditions and purposely being possessed by them willingly by dressing like them, but we do have this pesky thing called demonic possession in the West, which people suffer from, you know, where they are being tormented by beings they think are inside of them. And that squares with the agenda of the Nephilim. You know, these are creatures that were once kings and rulers who are now disembodied. And it's described that, you know, they wander in dry places, they hunger and thirst but have no senses to satisfy those desires and cravings. So what they do is they try to get into you if they can. And they will live vicariously through your senses and make you do the things that they want to experience and experience it through your body. And that's what possession is really all about. And that's what it's possessing you. It's these Nephilim creatures, these once great giants that were on the earth at some point. And their number is legion. They are by the thousands, you know, there's millions of them. And it's a serious issue. And it's kind of what Jesus came for, to give us a means and a way, not only to save us through salvation, you know, and solve the issue of original sin, but also to give us a way to fight against these things by giving us authority over them to cast them out of people. And that's what a lot of his ministry was. It was going around casting demons out of people to prove through example that even the demons bow down to him. Even he has authority over these demons, because that's the rule. No, they're weak, they're a defeated enemy at the end of the day. And they were a serious issue before he came along and gave us an ability to actually do something about it. So people were in awe at witnessing somebody going around casting demons out. You know, they were like, no one's ever been able to do this before. You know, this is something we just had to deal with for thousands of years. It's kind of, this person has actually defeated them, you know, and it was a big deal. And the problem never went away today. This is the thing. We just don't believe in that anymore in the West. We've kind of, that's just fairy tales and nonsense. But you'll find thousands of people talking about their experiences with demonic entities and creatures, even to this day, you know. And
do you follow Jerry Marzinski, Paul?
Yeah, I've talked to him. I've had him on the channel.
Oh, have you? Oh, excellent.
I have. Yeah, right. Yeah. He's an amazing. Yeah, he's seen it all. And he's not a religious person, you know what I mean? He just worked in the prison system.
He wasn't when he started, at least.
Well, no, absolutely not. You know, and I don't think he's a Christian about it, and that's fair enough. But he doesn't deny at all that these things have a consciousness that is very distinct and unique. These people aren't making it up, these schizophrenics, you know, and they have an agenda. You know, these entities are working together, you know, and they actually have a hierarchy in some weird way, and they have a plan, you know, and they feed off of people's energies, literally. Like they produce fear on purpose to get energy from it. And his stories are wild. The things he's seen, you know, and yeah.
He's been on Dom and Chris's show, Sheep Farm, numerous times, and he's really fascinating. Yeah. All I say, I'm thick as fuck. So if I start talking Latin, call a priest.
Well, that's
Don't know the
it.
first word of it.
Yeah. It's amazing what people who actually, you can see videos of people who, in let's say Africa or a lot of heavily pagan cultures where they have these ancestor spirit cults. You can find videos of people being possessed by demons, and they do start talking in a weird language, and they start convulsing and twisting their limbs in ways no human being would willingly do to themselves. They cut themselves, they make themselves bleed hideously, and their eyes go insane. You're like, they actually, and it's not human. Whatever's going on there is something bizarre and supernatural, and it's actually quite weird to behold. And with the age of the internet, you can find these things now. Everyone's got a phone, everyone's got a camera, so it's a lot more readily available to actually see evidence of possession in real time. And it's not like the movies, it's not like Exorcist, you know what I mean? It's actually, sometimes it's a lot more subtle, but in these places where the demons don't have to hide, because Christianity doesn't have a foothold, they're in cultures where that haven't changed for thousands of years, and they still have their folk ancestor worship traditions. They're not really hiding it, they're out in the open, possessing people and doing crazy stuff to the people they possess out in the open to everyone else who's witnessing it, because they revel in it and the people there worship them. They don't have a problem with them. But in the West, we're a heavily Christianized society. It's more dangerous for demons to be more open and overt about what they do and how they operate, and it's more optimal for them here to stay hidden and not let the person know they're in them, because as soon as the person figures it out, they could then figure out that they can cast them out using Jesus, and that's just not optimal. That's not ideal for a demon, so they tend not to reveal themselves as much, in the West, and that's why we have more of an occult society here when it comes to witchcraft. It's more hidden, it's in the shadows, you have to go through the adept levels, you have to be initiated, you got to keep the secrets type of thing. But in these other cultures, like say in Africa and some places in India and just all over the earth, they all have their own folk traditions there, everywhere. In Siberia as well, in Australia, many Aboriginal cultures of many continents. It's not a secret. They know what they're doing. I'm dressing like my ancestors so they can possess me. And everyone's cool with it, but it's different for us. That's why we have symbols instead, and why we have costumes like the clown, for example, which we are told is just something fun for the kids. That's as deep as we're told to ever go with it. But they now get to, because we believe that, dress like demons and be possessed by them, and we wouldn't know. We would just think they're dressing like a clown to entertain the kids. It's just a bit of fun, because we're ignorant. But, dressing like the thing to evoke the thing is a well understood, normal practice everywhere else around the world. But for us...
So why do you think we bother trying to cast them out? Just leave them to it.
Well, they tend to ruin people's lives. There is a spiritual war at play here at the end of the day. It's not simply that they're just harmless. They're not harmless. Like, they cause people to go insane, kill themselves, lose their own grip on reality and mind. The demons themselves are highly perverted. They make people do things that they shouldn't be doing, horrible, heinous things to people of all sizes and ages. It's not good. Like, being possessed by a demon is in no way a good thing.
It just begs the question, Jimmy Savile, doesn't it? Was Jimmy Savile possessed by a Nephilim?
Well, likely a legion of them. Yeah, likely. I think it's funny actually, because I think they just done a documentary kind of retelling his story on the BBC or something. I've been seeing clips of that around, where there's a scene where he's dressed like a jester in a hospital for some reason. I think, I see that as a subtle wink and nod personally, considering my own research there. But, I wouldn't recommend demonic possession. Let's put it that way. There's better things to do with your life.
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking, when you were talking earlier about the clowns and the links to the royal families and the crown and stuff.
Yeah.
What was I suppose, is there a link to like that jester role in the royal court? And you just reminded me then what I was thinking about earlier. Yeah,
well, you have to understand the first jesters and clowns came around in Greek theatre and Roman performative street performers. This is just before the collapse of Rome. So around 500, I think 500 AD, is when the collapse was kind of in full swing, and Christian thinking was taking over the Roman Empire, and a lot of these Roman performers kind of weren't really allowed to work publicly and openly anymore. It was frowned upon. It was considered things of the devil to do that kind of thing, to be actors and performers, to lie to people, and pretend to be other things that you're not. So it's kind of what people refer to as the Dark Ages, that 1,000-year period from there to the 1600s, where there was a renaissance of art. There was kind of a quiet zone throughout medieval European history where there weren't really many performances like theatre acts and things like that. And when they were, there was always showing devils and demons, and the Jester and the Joker was always representing the devil figure in these acts, And you found a lot of these performers had to basically do private shows for the rich and influential, and that's where you started to get court jesters becoming a thing. Only the rich got to have the entertainers to come in and schmooze and make all the rich people laugh in the banquet halls type of thing. That's where the jester role started to become a courtly thing, you find during that period mainly. But there's people have theorized, that there's this thing, what are they called? The Comprachicos, were a group of people who would create human oddities. So they would deform babies at birth, and by putting them in, making them grow in jars, so their limbs would deform in weird ways, and they would create freaks, basically. And a lot of these were considered by the rich aristocracy of the time as like a commodity to own. I have my own freak jester court fool, who's like a weird dwarf-like deformed creature, and the sense of humor. Yeah, basically. But these were just human babies who were sold and then deformed and forced to be grown in a weird way through forced putting boards in certain places and tying them there and keeping them there for years and years and years, just doing stuff to them to warp the way they looked physically. And the rich aristocracy, having the sixth sense of humor they had, thought this was hilarious, so they would buy them and have them in their courts, foolery or jesters, and they would make them dress in that way. So you'll find a lot of grotesque artwork depicting these really deformed jesters around this period of time as well. Symbolically speaking, I don't think there's much to do with the Nephilim and the Jester directly. But there was definitely some weird, horrible stuff going on with jesters around that time. And like I said, most of the time, the Jester itself was based on a demon figure from medieval theatre. It was the same costume, the same idea. And also it was based on someone called Arlecchino, which developed out of the Commedia dell'arte movement. So, kicked out of Rome, collapse of Rome, 500 AD, a lot of these performers formed troupes, which went around medieval Europe, travelling from city to city, putting on shows wherever they were welcome. Because obviously at first...
the troubadours?
Yeah, that's what I mean. But this was called the Commedia. This was the Italian version. This was their... It was called Commedia dell'arte, okay? And they had their stock characters, which were usually the rich man, the soldier, the daughter of the rich man, the servant, the slave, just regular stock characters of every society that people would recognize. And they would put them in fun improvisational scenes on the stage. They would travel from town hall to town hall, build a quick stage, do some performances, take some money in a hat, move to the next place. And that went on for a long time, and that developed into quite an interesting cast of characters, and one which got incorporated into the Commedia dell'arte was this character called Arlecchino, which was based on the Wildman tradition of Europe. So you find, as they were traveling around, they noticed every single the city they went to and wherever they went in Europe, they all had the same kind of weird folk tradition of venerating or fearing the wild man, which was like a tall, giant, hairy creature with a club. And in French mythology, this was known as Harlequins. And so that's where you get the name Harlequin from.
Harlequin.
That's where it comes from, yeah. So Harlequin himself, which was the first proto-devilish clown character, was literally based on a devil or a demon or a Nephilim giant called a wild man. That's literally what it is. Historically speaking, a clown has its roots in a direct representation of a Nephilim giant. It just does, historically speaking. There's no denying it. You know what I mean? And this is all documented. This is documented history. This is not unknown. It's just not really talked about. Why would you bother to find all this stuff out? They're just a bunch of performers. It's a bit of fun. Get over it. Is what most people think about it. But I'm looking for these root causes, and you'll find Harlequin coming out of the medieval period. Obviously, like I said, Jesters were kind of inspired by the similar character, but Harlequin was also inspired by the devilish jester, we'll call it, which was in medieval plays, mixed in with Harlequins, mixed in with characters from the Mediterranean, such as Hermes and Dionysus, and these other people who had weird staffs, magical staffs called the caduceus and things like that.
Yeah.
And had they could fly, and they were really quick-witted and could jump about and acrobatic in nature. Harlequin was all of these things. Harlequin had his slapstick instead of the club or instead of the caduceus. And with the slapstick, he could slap the stage and make it change suddenly, like he had magical powers, like a demon, And that was kind of his shtick. And the comedy would arise from him playing with his stick like it was a phallus, which is very Dionysian in nature, the phallic god symbol worship. So Harlequin was quintessentially a demon. That's what his character was supposed to be. He was the demon character in the Comédie de l'Art play where the comedy came from. The interactions that came from the interactions with Harlequin. However, it changed as it went up to England throughout the hundreds of years after that. So the 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, it kind of spread north into England, this tradition of the Harlequinade, and it became the pantomime in the UK. And by this point, in the 1800s, 1700s coming up to the 1800s, the pantomime was like a drama, and at the end, they would do the Harlequinade, which would be all the characters would change into the stock joke characters, and you had Harlequin, Clown, Pantaloon, Columbine, and I think another zany character. I can't remember what it was now. And they basically just a comedy show would happen at the end of all the serious drama for like an hour, and it was an intense chase scene where basically Harlequin steals the daughter of the rich man, Columbine, and tries to run away with her, and then a chase scene would ensue, and trying to catch Harlequin is where the comedy came from. And that's what happened in Britain. And we had a clown character. This is where clowns started to become a thing as we know it today. And it was based on the clown character of the French theatre performances, which was known as... it's not Pagliacci, it's the other one. I can't remember. It begins with P anyway. But he was a sad sack, weird-looking, white-faced clown with black pom-poms and a cone hat with black pom-poms, a big baggy white sheet, And it's Poirot. That's the name. Poirot was the clown. And he was kind of like a sad, doting, lovesick idiot who wanted Columbine, but she wanted Harlequin. So everyone laughed at him because he was the pathetic loser who couldn't get the girl. She wanted the Chad Harlequin instead, and it was that kind of thing, you know what I mean? And the British clown wasn't that. The British clown was like a loutish drunk, you know what I mean? And like just fell over and was foolish and idiotic in a way. But as time went on, Harlequin was no longer becoming that devilish character. He was just this weird, boring person who just ran away with the woman and could do a load of tricks. But he didn't have that edge he used to have in the 1600s where he would act like a devil. So there's kind of a vacuum for that character to be filled, and the British clown took over and became what Harlequin originally was. He became the vicious, demonic, witty, evil character who would always be scheming, selfish, self-centered, and made rude jokes. So that's where the British clown kind of became Harlequin. And Harlequin just became this weird, lame, dotish, stock character who was just a shadow of his former self, you know what I mean? Didn't really act in any way he used to act originally. So there was that role switch in the 1800s, and there was also a costume change around the same time. Charles Dibdin was the owner of Sadler's Wells and Drury Lane's theatres at the time, and he was a well-known Freemason in the Leicestershire Lodge. He was known for making nautical music for maritime sailors, and he basically was like a mogul for the entertainment industry in London at that time. He was just a big player, and just like we have secret societies running the Illuminati music industry today, in a sense, we had the Illuminati running the entertainment industry then as well in the 1800s. They owned all the theatres, And he decided to make a costume change in the 1800s, and he changed the clown costume from boring white servant garb to psychedelic coloured, fractaled, weird frills, like we have today. And that also came with Harlequin's costume becoming a bit more skin tight, having a sailor's hat and a basic flat mask. prior to that, Harlequin's mask was actually a hairy beast type thing with an ugly nose, but it became this really lithe, delicate, eloquent face mask, and the clown instead became the ugly, violent beast demon character. So that switch was made intentionally, I think. I think because the actor at the time, who's Joseph Grimaldi, he was like, as far as fame goes, he was a rock star for the period. Like Joseph Grimaldi was the best performer people have ever seen in their entire lives in the 1800s. He was insane. He brought clown to life. Before that, clown was just a background character. Now everyone was obsessed with clown. So clown became the lead in the Harlequin odds. And Harlequin was gone. He was just a back character now. And now clown was the star of the show. And at the same time this happened, the costume change happened, which looked eerily similar to the type of things people wear in these folk traditional cultures where they're venerating and worshipping demons. So with the involvement of a Freemason in that decision, around the same time, circuses were starting to grow, which were all Freemason owned as well. You have, for example, the Ringling Brothers and P.T. Barnum and Bailey. I think P.T. Barnum was the one who came up with the phrase, "There's a sucker born every minute." I think he's the one who came up something like that. And he started the biggest circuses known to man, in America especially. And at the same time, Joseph Grimaldi invents this clown character. So we're told, but really it was a Freemason called Charles Dibdin, but no one talks about that. Invented this new costume, which was copied from then on. And it was basically the psychedelic clown costume we have today, which I believe was inspired by the folk traditional ancestor worship cultures he would have been very privy to, because he's a part of a secret society that venerates demons. So he knows what they look like. And I think he inserted it into the most popular art form of the time, which was the theatre shows at Drury Lane, the pantomime. So he took over the industry and inserted his demonic characters into it, using the famous people idolized at the time, Joseph Grimaldi. It's the same tactic they do today, and they just did it in a really old school way in the 1800s. And since then, Joey is the name people call clowns today based off Joseph Grimaldi. He was the patsy. He's the one given all the credit, but he had nothing to do with it. It was Freemason design from start to finish, basically. And then circuses appear. And you'll find what a circus truly is. And the first circus performances in America especially, which were all Freemason owned. Every Ringling Brother was a Freemason. P.T. Barnum and Bailey were all Freemasons. And they all got together and they did a huge show called King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And, and every single thing in that show was created through Freemason affiliated organizations. So all the costumes were created and sewn together by the same companies who make all the costumes for Freemasons in their lodge rituals. Okay, and what they basically did, and this again, I've got the receipts, I've got all the words in the documented history for this. They basically put their rituals, which would normally be in a small lodge hidden away somewhere, on the big stage in a circus. And that's what they did. They transferred it from hidden to public. So they were externalizing their own hierarchy there. But the people who paid to come and see it and give energy to the huge ritual thought it was just a bit of fun for the kids with funny clowns. But what is a clown but a representation of demons? Who is King Solomon but the Lord of the Ring, the ringmaster, the one who had the ring to control the demons, And the ringmaster in any circus wears a top hat and has this outfit on with the cane, and not only a reference to Cain, the father of Freemasonry, the one it originally all goes back to where the corruption began, but if you go to any Freemason lodge, the grand worshipful master, the leader of the ritual in a lodge, is the only one allowed to wear a top hat, and that's the ringmaster of a circus. So it's all just allegorical copies of Freemason ritual manifested into what we call a circus performance of the time. And for a long time, circuses were big money. These were huge rituals being put on, huge performative rituals, basically summoning demons on a mass public scale. With clowns involved and everything, who are the symbol for the demons, people dressing like the things to evoke the things in a literal ritualistic circle called the ring of a circus. As time has gone on, circuses are a bit old school now. We have TV. It's evolved a bit. I say evolved a bit. They're not subtle anymore in any way, shape, or form if you look at modern media. But it's people have moved on from circuses. They're kind of a remnant, a relic of the past. But if you look through the history of it all, it's all satanic in nature, quite literally.
This is wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's wild stuff.
Crazy.
It made me think. It puts a new perspective on the court jester having this very unique and special role at court as being the only person there who can sort of make fun
Insult.
of the sovereign, and it sort of flips that relationship there. You think, well, yeah, the blue blood knows who the jester represents at a spiritual level or a symbolic level, and maybe that's why he's allowed to get away with taking the piss out of the king or the queen or whoever.
Oh, absolutely,
Which is,
absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right.
Puts a new spin on it, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does. Like I said, these people know what they truly represent. It's kind of, that person's dressed like one of my gods. I better treat it kindly, because if you dress like the thing, you channel the thing. And this is the irony, in the West, we've kind of been told this crock of lies. And a lot of places in Europe believe this, but we kind of believe if you dress like something, you can fool it into not attacking you or scare it away. We have the opposite worldview here in the West. We have there's a tradition called the cookery in Bulgaria, and a lot of Eastern European and Mediterranean cultures. In fact, most of Europe has a wild man tradition, as I mentioned earlier, but the cookery is a very ancient one. It's not changed at all. It's not been tainted. It's kind of maintained its roots for thousands of years and hasn't changed at all. And they dress like these incredibly hairy, wild, sharp teeth, horned beasts. And the theory behind it is you're dressing like it to ward away evil spirits before Lent. And it's been a highly Christianized kind of thing where it's like it's a period of extreme excess before fasting. Do you get what I mean? It's Ash Wednesday. It's the Lent period, the fasting period. That just before the darkness comes in, and to scare away the dark spirits type of stuff. It's like a mix of paganism mixed with Roman Catholicism. It's a weird European thing we have going on, but we seem to believe for some reason that dressing like a demon is going to scare one away, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. It never. Why would that make any sense whatsoever when every other culture on the earth knows full well, no, I dress like it so it will come into me. I am dressing like it to invite it, not scare it away. It's just us who have this stupid, imagined, nonsensical worldview that, dressing like something, well, it either means nothing at all or it'll scare away evil demons. And it's kind of like, that's just naive. That's just kind of silly when you think about it. But that's the way we view it, and that's kind of how in the dark we really are, in a sense, about it in the West. And I think me revealing what the symbol of a clown means has kind of made people start thinking a little bit. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah. I think that's why it resonates with people quite a lot. Because I didn't think I'd be the guy talking about clowns. I didn't grow up imagining myself to be this guy talking about what a symbol of a bloody clown means. It's just something I happened to uncover, and I'm just that guy now, But for some reason,
the thing I don't understand about all this is if clowns are giants, why do they have such small cars?
I can explain that. All right, you ready? Okay.
Ready?
Right. So first of all, let's break down the symbol of a clown. Why is it a representation of the Nephilim? We need to know that first. Okay. So most Nephilim creatures are described as having white skin and red hair. Outside biblical sources confer this, and you can kind of get hints of it from the Bible itself. But most representations in these folk traditional cultures represent their demons as having pale white skin and red hair. That's the basis of a clown. That's all you need, first of all, to start making a clown. Okay, that's the base. So let's start from there. The clowns have big, wide, red smiles. This is because they have serpentine features inherited from their fathers, the Nephilim, so they can open their mouths really wide, like a snake. Serpents can dislocate their jaws to eat their prey, for example. This is just a feature they picked up from their parents, so clowns have been given the same wide smile. They have red all the way around it, only because imagine a lizard with human lips. It would look pretty trippy, okay? And they'd have red lips, you know what I mean? But not only that, it could be a symbolic reference to the fact that they were blood drinkers. They ate humans, and they reveled in drinking the blood which had the life in it, as it's described in the Bible. And that could be a symbolic of them being smeared with blood as well around the mouth, hence why they have a red nose. It could be that it was also dipped in blood through eating people. But however, pale skin actually comes with a weird consequence, and it's called the curse of the Celts in modern medicine. And basically, we have this issue where pale people suffer from extreme rosacea in some cases, and it's only really something white Europeans have to deal with. And it also comes with high iron in the blood as well. Hemochromatosis is called. And this really is predominantly 99.9% an issue really pale northern white people have to deal with. Okay, I might actually have hemochromatosis. I'm going through the doctors right now to see what's going on because I have high iron in my blood. But it can come with a consequence of having extreme rosacea, which is blotchy red patches all over your pale white skin, which is polka dot patterns. But not only that, it can also cause something called a rhinophyma, which is where the nose gets really bulbous and red and starts growing, and it can look like a clown nose in extreme cases. And this is only something that people with extremely pale skin suffer from, and the Nephilim had the palest skin. They had porcelain white skin. So it could be a genetic defect which caused their noses to become bulbous and rhinophymed, which is why the modern clown representation wears a big bright red nose. So that's where that could come from. Clowns are often depicted with a slit going down the eye. This is a serpentine eye slit. That's what it represents. But also a cross can represent that they are dead creatures. They are disembodied spirits now. They are basically just the living dead, in a sense. You know, they have no body, but they still live on the earth in spirit form. So it's twofold with the crosses. And often the wig they wear accentuates a really high forehead, or a cone head, or a pin head of some way. Nephilim skulls found all around the earth in the Inca area predominantly have elongated skulls. The Nephilim had one. And that's how you often see a clown depicted. They always have a really big, huge, pointed, wide head with the hair to accentuate it coming out the sides. The hair can often be in a jester-like horn shape. Think Krusty the Clown, for example. This is where it could be a reference to horns, maybe. But I think, again, it's just to elongate the head. It's just to accentuate that the forehead is really prominent and wide in a clown symbol. So that's pretty much the face dealt with. If you look, clowns have a ruffle around the neck, which not only do the Wangina, an ancient rain god of Australia, have, they have the same ruff on their rock art depictions. But it could also be symbolic of a reptilian frill. Reptiles and lizards are one of the species that have this thing called a frill. And Australia have a lot of these lizards, actually, where when they get defensive, it comes up behind them and creates a halo around the head. And it has like bony spines going through it. I think the ruffle of a clown is a tongue-in-cheek reference to a reptilian frill. That seems to be what it's about. And I can only confirm this because in a film in 2014, it came out literally called Clown. It shows a person who puts on a costume he finds in the attic of a clown because he needs to find one quickly to entertain his daughter on her birthday. It turns out he put on the skin of an ancient demon called a cloyne. Okay, this is the film. Right, and he can't take it off. It won't come off. It's fused with his skin. And he starts turning into a monster, mimicking this clown demon. And he has to eat 5 children to break the curse and be free from the skin. Okay, right, I know.
Ain't it always the way?
Yeah, but in this weird film that came out 2 years before I started my research anyway, it has a frill around its neck, which is a reptilian, spiny, bony circus frill. It's supposed to be making... No, it's there. That's what gave me the hint to what the ruffle around the neck is supposed to be. It's a reptilian feature again. Let's go to the clothes of a clown. Psychedelic fractaled, coloured, multicoloured patterns and polka dots. Have you looked at a lizard or a snake? They're incredibly colourful and psychedelic. They are the most psychedelic creatures on the earth. They come in so many colours and forms and patterns and shapes. It's unreal. They are extremely colourful creatures. And that's what the clown costume is supposed to represent, the serpentine, colourful, reptilian skin nature. Clowns often have very large shoes or big gloves because they are representing giants who would have had very big feet and big hands. Often you see them on stilts, not uncommon, because they're giants. And it's just a symbolic reference to the giant serpentine nature.
Would the white gloves be another Freemason reference?
Yeah, I think that is a thing. Yeah, maybe. And again, this is invented by Freemasons. Like I said, it was Charles Dibdin who created the costume of a clown, literally, and he was a well-established, high-level Freemason of the Leicestershire Lodge. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was incorporating some of his own stuff into it that he would do on a daily basis. So yeah, I can believe that. It's an interesting one. I never considered that. I'll add that into the book. Thanks for letting me know.
Give us a credit.
Yeah, I'll give you a little credit for that, yeah.
I'll just take Phil. Phil's fine.
Yeah, but as you can see, everything to do with a clown is just a reference to the Nephilim, but it's like a caricature. It's a cartoonish over-exaggeration. So let's get to the car. So,
Yes.
Loads of loads of clowns come out of a tiny car. Okay, and they just keep coming, don't they? And that's the gag. Well, symbolically speaking, when you're possessed by a demon, you have a legion inside of you. And a car, symbolically speaking, everyone knows this. If you dream about being in a car and it breaking down, it's usually a symbol or a representation of your own health, your own body is breaking down. The vehicle or a car represents one's ability to traverse the world, to move within it as a symbol. So a car full of clowns is a body full of demons. And demons tend to come by the legion in heavy amounts of numbers. So many clowns coming out of a tiny car is many demons coming out of one vessel or body.
Wow, Paul, you've absolutely ruined circuses for me.
Good, he would say, I'm sure.
Well,
Paul, we've blown over an hour already. I wanted to ask you about Gnostics, about AI, about transhumanism, about psychedelics, about your path to Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But it's going to have to wait for the next time, man. We've kept you long enough. But this has been absolutely fascinating, man. I mean, is there anything you want to leave us with, or anywhere you particularly want to send anybody before we wrap up?
Yeah, if you want to go to my channel to find out more of this stuff, it's called UnderstandingConspiracy, or as the tag says there, at UConspiracy. There's literally a 41 episode series. It spans over years. It goes into a lot more detail. It names names, you know what I mean? Like you were asking earlier, it gives all the actual traceable histories. I go through all the cultures I've been hinting at one by one, and I break down each individual culture and how they do their own ancestor worship. It's all kind of there in much more thorough detail on the channel. In these hour-long talks, all I can do is just give you a very quick overview, you know, but I recommend going there, clicking the playlist tab, Nephilim Look Like Clowns, and just binge it. Just go through it and you'll be enlightened to everything there. I do a weekly show, but I'm recently doing the podcast circuit, like you said at the start. You can find me everywhere right now, going into this in detail in many ways. So just search out my name, Understanding Conspiracy or Paul Stobbs, and you'll find me all over the place. But YouTube's the place to find me. And in terms of, you know, we only live around the corner from each other. Maybe next time I'll do this in person, but there's so much more to talk about. We can talk about the music industry. We can talk about how these practices are used and how the clown is used in all modern art to channel them and to gain power from them. We could talk about the psychedelic realm and how people see jesters when taking DMT. There's a lot more we have not touched upon, which I hope I get.
The machine elves, man.
Absolutely.
Clubbing Nephilim jesters, man.
Clockwork clowns.
The clockwork clowns, man. Yeah, it's all fitting together like a nice.
Oh yeah.
Like
a cockle van.
Okay,
Yeah, this has been fantastic, Paul. Like I said, we should do this again. Just stay on the line for us for 1 minute while we play ourselves out.
Sure thing.
And shut down the stream. And you lot out there in YouTube land who are following us live, we'll be back in about 10 minutes to do some news.
Yeah.
Right. Stand by. Check out the links in the show notes. Follow Paul's channel. Sign up for his book. All the rest of it. All right. Sayonara.
Bye.
Bye.
Talking about buttered sausage.